And we're having several events around National Gun Violence Survivors Week, which is this week, to highlight some of the efforts that are being made to elevate this issue because it is so important, especially now that gun violence is the leading cause of death for children in the United States. The Borough President is a terrific advocate for gun safety legislation and has been focused on this for quite some time in addressing it through a variety of ways, including through sort of wraparound services where we're providing the basic economic support, housing support, job support, education support to limit the demand for guns, and then on the back end that we have programs to reintegrate people who may be coming out of prison so that they don't go back to any criminal ways that got them in prison in the first place. And we've had a lot of great conversations about this, and he's been a great advocate, and it made a lot of sense to join in on this forum to hear from survivors so that we can take their messages, that we can take their experiences back with us as we advocate for common sense gun safety reform.
Good morning. I want to take a second and welcome everyone to Borough Hall, to the People's House. On behalf of our Borough President, I want to thank you all for coming out here today. What we're here to discuss is incredibly important. And I want to start by sharing a story with you. April 11th, 1990, my best friend was shot and killed leaving my boyfriend's house as they were having a conversation about the prom. He was shot execution style, once in the head, twice in the neck, and once in the back, and his body was dumped, and they found him the next morning. So what we're here to talk about today is very serious. It has impacted almost everybody that's sitting here, and it's time that we do more than just talk about it. I want to thank each and every one of you who have shared your stories and tell your stories over and over and over again, and thank the Congressman for convening us here today. So to the members of the staff, we want to make sure that you understand that this conversation right now is just for the people who are sitting here at this table, but as soon as the conversation is over, you'll have access to Congressman Goldman and BP Reynoso to ask any questions that you would like, but at this time, we would ask that you respect everyone that is speaking and allow them to say what they need to say. And so now I'm going to pass the mic over to Congressman Goldman.
Thank you very much, Kim. Thank you all for being here. The survivors who we are going to hear from today share stories that we cannot forget, and we need to be consistently reminded of the devastation that gun violence has on our communities so that we can continue to raise the issue so that we can stop this epidemic. As many of you know here, gun violence is now the leading cause of death for children in the United States. Cars have gotten safer, but guns have not. And what we are trying to highlight this week, which is National Gun Violence Survivors Week, is the stories of the survivors and the devastation that gun violence causes to our friends, our neighbors, our communities. I always tell the story of how things have changed so much in the last 30 years. There are almost 2 mass shootings a day now. And I have a kindergartner and first grader who both go through active shooter drills at school, and they barely know what a gun looks like. We used to have fire drills. Now we have active shooter drills. Every parent worries not about who their child plays with on the playground, but whether they are going to come home from school that day. It does not have to be that way. And we had a terrific conversation last night with Rebecca Fisher from New Yorkers Against Gun Violence and Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg, talking about different ways that we can raise this issue, make it a serious issue for this upcoming election federally, and use New York as a model for some of the legislation that we need to go nationally. And I'm thrilled that we have such a great crew here. Crystal Hudson, my friend, City Councilwoman from Brooklyn, and Alexa Viles, also in the City Council, and I think the Borough President will be here shortly. But I don't want to take too much time because we're here to hear from the survivors and your stories so that we can truly understand the impact of this epidemic. So I will pass it back over to Kim.
So now we're going to hear from our council members. We'll start with Councilmember Crystal Hudson.
Thank you so much, and good morning, everyone. Thank you to the Congress member and the Borough President for hosting us this morning, and thank you to survivors and families of lost ones for being here, for, again, sharing your stories and for your advocacy. I'm Crystal Hudson. I represent the 35th District here in Brooklyn, the neighborhoods of Crown Heights, Prospect Heights, Fort Greene, and Clinton Hill. And I, would say from a personal perspective as a council member for just 2 years, one term, I have attended more shooting responses and more funerals for victims of gun violence than I ever thought I would in just 2 years. I do a lot of work with crisis management and cure violence providers to try to prevent the gun violence that we have, but I know that in our communities, and particularly in communities of color, we are afflicted by gun violence at disproportionate rates here in New York City, and so I'm committed to doing everything that I can do, through my office to ensure that we keep our children safe, we keep our communities safe, we keep each other safe, and we try to keep guns off of our streets. So I look forward to the rest of the program, and thank you again for having me here this morning.
Thank you, Council Member. We're now going to hear from Council Member Alexa Avila.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Councilmember Alexa Viles. I represent District 38, which includes the neighborhoods of Sunset Park, Red Hook, Borough Park, Dyker Heights, Bensonhurst. We've been recently redistricted, so a lot of small pieces of neighborhoods. I want to thank the Congressman for having this conversation and elevating this issue and elevating the stories that unfortunately seems our country has become very much desensitized to. My father was killed in front of me when I was 5 years old. And it's not an easy story to tell. In fact, just saying that out loud, my heart is racing, my stomach hurts, and I kind of feel like I still want to cry. I'm a 51-year-old woman. And so I say that to say to the survivors who are here sharing their stories and have had to endure the trauma of publicly sharing their stories over and over again, to bring a semblance of action and true action is probably one of the hardest things to do. And so I thank you deeply for your advocacy. I thank you for holding care and compassion, because that is the type of community that we are all fighting for, where everyone is safe, where everyone has what they need to thrive, because we can do that as the wealthiest country in the world. And so I thank you, and I look forward to hearing your stories and the work that needs to be done to remove guns. And in fact, I've never gotten more vitriolic response when I made a statement that we should just have no guns. Like we could, my daughter has the best advice for us. She says, Mom, if we just replace it with water guns, things would be so different. A young but very profound statement of human interaction and the belief in human potential. And so I thank you all, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Council Member. And now we will hear from our Borough President, Honorable Antonio Reynoso.
Thank you so much. Welcome, first and foremost, to the center of the greatest borough in the city of New York, which is Brooklyn. I think people on the dais can agree with that. But I'm so happy to have you all here today. I want to thank Representative Dan Goldman. The Congressman reached out to us and asked us to partner with him on this important issue, and really am grateful for the leadership that you've provided on this issue and making it sure that we continue. I think a lot of people think once you have the conversation one time, you just keep it moving. And for a lot of the victims, the initial support is always there, but then who's with them thereafter for the years that go on, outside of their advocacy or their continued advocacy, their support and resources seem to dry up. So I'm happy to be here in support of continuing the work alongside Dan Goldman here on this issue. Again, want to thank our council members for being here. Brooklyn is always front and center on advocacy on this issue, more so than arguably any other borough in the city of New York. This is an issue that's deeply important to them. The one thing that I want to leave with is, and I know this is, and I've talked to Congressman about this, I believe the safest neighborhoods in our city are the ones that have the least amount of cops. And whether you're in Brooklyn Heights or Park Slope, you'll be hard pressed to find a police car. But there's no gun violence in those neighborhoods, or less gun violence in those neighborhoods. But what those neighborhoods do have is an abundance of other resources that I think are deeply important to providing safety. And I think one of those is, of course, education, great jobs, transportation access, good housing, high quality housing, good park space. Those are all resources these communities have in common. All these resources are not available to folks, let's say, that live in Brownsville, East New York, or Coney Island, which are the highest levels of gun violence that we see in our city. So for me, over-resourcing them with something that I believe these other communities have versus over-resourcing them with something that these communities don't have, which are cops, doesn't seem like the solution for me. It just doesn't add up to me. But another part of what I think is deeply important is that the folks that are looking to the solution should be the people that are most affected. There's no one that knows more about this issue than the people that we're going to hear from in a few. The folks here are kind of, I say the microphone, the boombox, the projection of the recommendations and asks of the folks that have suffered through it. And I think I want to add that to what will make our community safe. They know best, and I'm really looking forward to listening from them, to getting more insight on this issue from them, and then eventually looking to see if we can execute, have some outcomes, have some deliverables that we can show for. So again, thank you so much for having me today. Thank you for coming to your house, the People's House here in Brooklyn. And I again want to thank Congressman Dan Goldman for putting this together and allowing me to be a partner with him on it. Thank you.
So once again, I want to thank all of the electeds who have taken time out of their very busy schedule to sit here and listen. So now we're going to hear from these survivors or family members of people who have been impacted by gun violence. We want to acknowledge that Trinell Gabby was supposed to be here. She is the widow of Carrie Gabay, who served as the assistant counsel to New York Governor Cuomo. And we all remember what happened to him during Juve and how she's kept his advocacy alive. So she's not feeling well, but she was planning to be here today, and we want to acknowledge what she has done in her advocacy. We're going to start off with Allison Glenn.
Well, thank you all for having us today. This is my first time participating in a program like this, so I'm shocked to be starting. I'll start the way that I know. I lost my brother Jared to gun violence 4 years ago. He was out with friends in a suburb of Detroit, Michigan, where my family grew up, so I'm not born and raised in New York. And there was a separate altercation. A man who was asked to leave the bar came back with a gun, and he fired into a crowd of people, injuring 6 and fatally wounding my brother. Jared was a light. This shouldn't have happened. There's so many reasons this shouldn't have happened. The person that murdered him was a convicted felon. And, you know, in the ways that I found forgiveness, it's also acknowledging that the person who murdered my brother was dealing with some of the same kinds of challenges that you mentioned. You know, rates of recidivism are high. The opportunity to assimilate back into culture, regular, like everyday life can be difficult for former convicted felons. And I also imagine that this person dealt with his own set of traumas that would lead him to think that it was right and decent to open fire on a crowd of people, injuring 6 and fatally wounding 1. And so for me, the issues are not only the guns, but it's everything around the guns. You know, what are we doing in general to deal with the issues that are plaguing communities that lead to gun violence? And that's my question, amongst other questions, but I think that's a good place to leave it.
Thank you, Allison. We're now going to hear from Andrea Murray.
Hi, thank you for inviting me. I'm Andrea Murray. I'm from Brooklyn. Go Brooklyn. I didn't grow up here. I'm not a native, but I live here now because I chose the best place. Thank you. I appreciate that. When my father was in his late 60s, he struggled with chronic pain and pain management. And one day, that struggle got to be too much. And my uncle, my dad's younger brother, woke up, he lived in Washington, woke up to an email from my dad that was basically a suicide note. And so he called my dad, wasn't able to reach him, and called my sister, who lives in California, and said, I don't know what to do. And so my sister called my dad's local law enforcement and asked them to do a wellness check. And so the officers got to my dad's house, and they found him watching TV next to a loaded gun. They determined that he was a risk to himself, and they took him to the hospital where he was admitted on a 48-hour psych hold. After 2 days, they determined that he was no longer a risk to himself, and they sent him home. And because at the time, Minnesota, where my dad lived, had no red flag laws, no extreme risk protection orders, there was nothing we could do to take the guns out of his house. And so a few weeks later, my brother came home from work and found our father dead. My dad never met my husband. He never saw my niece get her PhD. He never met his great-grandchildren. Extreme risk protection orders make it so that we can prevent people having to go through what my family and I have gone through. My husband never gets to understand where my really weird sense of humor comes from because he doesn't know my dad. So I'm really grateful to all of you for taking the time to listen to all of our stories and to hear what we're saying and to take those words back to the council, not the Senate, I'm sorry, House of Representatives. I mean, tell the Senate too, for heaven's sake, please. But I agree with Representative Goldman. We need to let people know and make this a priority. I did receive your email on Friday, and I want to thank you for signing on to the additional legislation that you've added your name to so that we can get rid of those loopholes and other issues that need to be addressed with gun violence. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Murray. We're now going to hear from Pam Height.
Hi, everyone. I almost forgot my name. How can I say this? I lost 2 sons to senseless violence. My youngest son was 17 years old. His name is Jaquin English, and he was gunned down in Gravesend, Coney Island the name can turn you off. I didn't want to move there. I was in a tier 2 at that time, and they told us that we had to choose an apartment. And at that time, I really wanted to stay in Brooklyn, where I already knew everyone, I was comfortable, but the name had just, that name, Gravesend, just, I needed a place to stay, so I needed to move. I would never thought that the 6 months that I stayed there, that my son would be the one that be murdered. I can count the bullets that was on the floor, the shells, the number signs. I even knocked over the news reporter just to see my son on the floor and how he was laying. I can see everything. I felt how my son was murdered in this hallway, that he wasn't alone. And the thing about it is, I just saying to everyone, they need to listen. Listen to us as survivors. You don't want to be in these shoes. These shoes is walkable, but not for anyone to be sitting in them, walking in them. And I wouldn't want anyone, Crystal, Antonio, Dan, I can't see the other names down there, but you see that Allison, Andrea, Miss Jackie Rowe, Arissa, we have to sit at a round table just to let everyone listen to how our sons was killed, or our daughters was killed, or our families was murdered. My oldest son is 32 years old and left me 3 grandchildren. It was so hard to keep going back and forth upstate. And he was stabbed in the abdomen, and I could just feel that pain. My heart is broken into pieces, but I smile every day because this is what we do. The face of a smile doesn't mean that we're not broken inside. It's so much that I have met Arissa Napa Williams that I was able to really speak because I was so angry. And when I say I was angry, I was so angry. And then when I met the mothers that's in our support group that went through what I went through, pulled me through, that now I'm here speaking to you at the table.
Yes, yes.
So I'm able to speak, and I'm going to keep on speaking because I do not want this to happen to anyone. And it's constantly happening every day. It doesn't matter what organization you're with, what community you with, it's still happening all over. It's not even called mass shooting, it's everyday shooting. It's not called Black Lives Matter, it's all Black and brown community being killed. And we're killing each other. But for what? All I say is just listen to us. Bring this back to them and let them know that we're tired. We're gonna keep fighting, but we're tired. We shouldn't have to be killing each other. We should be out here double dutch, barbecues, block parties. We stopped all that. Now we have to look over our shoulders on the trains, on the buses, walking out our doors, thinking, I have 2 daughters that are grown. I still say to myself, where you going? Who you with? And she's at work. I shouldn't have to keep constantly doing this every day. Nobody knows what we do behind closed doors. Anniversaries, birthdays, holidays. I don't get to celebrate them the way I want to celebrate it. All I can remember is that I had a chair in front of me that I dressed up as my son because I always thought that my son would be laying right next to me, bothering me, or burning up some macaroni and cheese with some Vienna sausages with crackers. I'm used to that every day. I'm used to my oldest son roller skating through the house and singing to me R. Kelly. Step, step. Our steps that we take forward is to move forward and speak forward. But my story, is going to keep continuing. And I'm going to stand for all survivors all over New York. And I stand for all states. I'm not here just to be here. I'm here to let everybody know that my voice will be taken for.
And now we're going to hear from Ms. Orissa Napier-Williams.
Wow, that sounds very French and nice. It's Napper.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
We're not here to be solemn because I'm reminded of a picture that I took with Nancy Pelosi, and she came back later that night and said, "Let me see the picture." And she looked at it, and she said, "I look so sad because I'm thinking about your son." And I said, "I look so happy because I'm thinking about my son."
Yes.
And so I know that this conversation can be morbid. This conversation can be downtrodden for a lot of us that continuously have to revisit it. But I believe that our loved ones' lives were sacrificed so that we would be here at the table and we would continue to live on and show others that there is hope. And so I am Orissa Napier-Williams, a proud BK baby, born in Brooklyn Jewish Hospital, taken home to Sumner Projects, lived in Bed-Stuy, Quincy, Troop, and Sumner, and then in Fort Greene. Before I transitioned up to Harlem and raised my sons there, but I'm a New York City child. And so today, I was jotting down things because I want to be intentional when I speak truth to power. I know just telling our stories can become a practice, but I like to end up with solutions. I'm a very solution-based person, and so my mind goes back to 1986, when I was Reese, pregnant with my second son, Justin, at the age of 21. And, you know, when you're put into different places, well, I know as for me, my mind goes back. And so as I walked by Supreme Court, it came to mind again that I have been on both sides of the gun. I remembered sitting in Supreme Court behind the side for my son Justin's father, listening to the judge give him 40 to life for 2 murders. And then I remember sitting in Supreme Court on the other side, hearing the judge give the young men that murdered my son innocently 25 to life. And although I've been on both sides of the courtroom, there is nothing like the side where no one can turn around and tell you, "I'll call you later." No one can turn around and tell you, "Come see me on a visit. I need a package." Where you are there and sometimes by yourself representing your loved one alone. And so while I know we try to compare, 2 lives was lost, the one that pulled the trigger, that went to jail, and it is no comparison to mothers that wake up without their children every day, to siblings that lost their best friends due to gun violence, to children, whether young or old, that have lost their parents. There is no comparison. And so on August 7, 2006, when I got the call that my son, who was just in Brooklyn visiting a family member, was shot, I raced to Brooklyn. My family member couldn't even tell me where they were because he was going ecstatic. My son was there to visit him. All I did was ran upstairs to get my phone that I left, and I heard the bullets. I heard the shots. And when I come back down, my little cousin is laying on the ground at 21 years old. And so the first place, I called 911, and they're saying, "Oh, they sent me to a hospital in Manhattan." I go there, and the officers you know, you're under investigation at that point. Well, what did your son have on? Well, what was your, I am here to look for my son. Oh, he's not here. We have another young man here. And as I approached the Woodhull Hospital and I saw the parking of Woodhull flooded with family and friends, I knew already. I knew that my son didn't make it. I knew when the chief doctor came out with the same questions. Do you know what your son had on? Do you know what your son was doing over here? That's when I lost it. Because I know Dan or Councilman Goldman gave us a sort of description earlier of the rate of youth that are killed. But our black and brown young men are killed at an all-time high. At an all-time high. And I'll even reiterate what Pam said. It's not about an organization. It's not about an individual. It's not about the type of shooting, whether mass or community. It is about humanity. With gun violence, there is no boundaries. You can say you live in the safest part of Brooklyn. You can live on the east side in Manhattan. This can happen at any day, time, hour, any store, any restaurant, in a library. It can happen wherever you are at. And so my son was killed with a dream. He never got the chance or the opportunity to live out his dream. After my son's was murdered, I kept getting mail from schools accepting him. He loved to cook. I used to tease him when he was younger. Dude, you got a tapeworm. You got to learn how to cook. Because all this cooking, I can't do it. And he loved to cook. And so he learned how to do that, and he wanted that to be his thing. And he was accepted to so many schools. He was gifted, a creative child. He won, it was an award when he had to be in about public school that the council did back then, where he won a recognition for a photo he drew of Rosa Parks during Black History Month. And I was so proud. He won for skateboarding when, what's the name of the place downtown? South Street Seaport. He won for skateboarding when South Street Seaport was built. He went to Juilliard and played the flute. We used to call him the little flute pipist in the projects. Everybody would look out of their window on Saturday mornings and seeing him running, late for the train to get to Juilliard. And I protected my son from that lifestyle. Although my other son had to deal with it with his father, they still was protected. And so I heard Crystal talk about, and are we talking about solutions now too, or what are we doing? We talking, okay, let's talk. I'm ready. Okay, we're gonna come right back, okay. So I want to end that by just saying that one of the most important things that I have learned is that before any of our loved ones have been murdered, we have all been traumatized with something. Our loved ones murdered is just an additional layer of trauma on top of everything else that we have dealt with. Some of us, it has been single parents, poverty. I tell my young men, you're already born with 2 strikes. You're born African American and male. And so when you layer on the trauma of a loved one being murdered, and sometimes not just being murdered, but seeing your loved one murdered, knowing that it could have been prevented, it brings a whole nother layer. So I want to thank you all for this opportunity. My expectation is not just to voice so that you will hear, but you have the power. And now that I'm meeting you all today, I put the pressure on the power all the time. So I am grateful for this newly established relationship. I'm grateful just for the hunger to want to hear about this and to be a part of the solutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. We're now going to hear from Ms. Jackie Rowe Adams.
They told my story. You know, Pam. And what I mean by that, they told my, it's the pain and hurt. Oh, I thought I had a big voice. The pain and hurt never goes away. But before I even go into my story, I just want to say to Alexa, anytime you feel like you want to cry, you cry, okay? Because it never goes away. You say you were 5 years old? I don't care how old you are, you remember that. And one thing about a loved one, losing a loved one, you don't know when you're gonna cry. We could be sitting on the subway. We could be sitting in this room. I might bust out. Because thoughts then came in my head, just like Aritza said. You know, just like Pam said. And that's when I said they told my story. Birthdays, holidays. So I'm Jackie Rowe Adams. I'm a mother who's lost 2 kids, like Pam, to gun violence. So 42 years ago, my first son got killed. Seemed just like yesterday. Just like yesterday. In a bodega, minding his business, right there on the 120. I'm a Harlem girl. Minding his business in a bodega, and now this is 40-some years ago, and this stuff is still happening. 2 young men was in there saying, and this is the word they use, why is that nigger looking at us? I hate that word today. We should kill him. Just like that. So, just fast forward, and how do I know that? Because the owner of the bodega, you know, you don't pay that no mind. You in the store and you hear somebody say, oh, excuse me, I'm gonna kill somebody today. Today we pay it some mind, but then we don't pay that no mind. So they followed my son out the store and followed him to the stoop on 122nd Street, where I was born and bred, in Harlem, and shot him right on the stoop where my parents live. My parents heard the shot. They looked out the window, and they couldn't believe that their grandson was laying there. Like I say, it never goes away. I'm telling the story now, and some days I could really tell the story and deal with it, and some days I can't. And today is, for some emotional reason, you know, just sitting here, and we have to relive and relive. But with the grace of God, we are sitting here to tell the story, to save another life, to save another mother, another family, another parent, feeling the pain and hurt that we feel. So who would have thought 16 years later? But by the way, they were caught, because the man in the bodega, and that's why I always say, we do have some heroes. We do have people that's out there and not scared to tell, because it ain't snitching, it's saving a life. So he saw the cops and said, there they go, and they caught him. So who would think 16 years later my second son would get killed? A 13-year-old killed my second son. And sometimes it's hard for me when we talk about the young kids. Oh, yeah, but they don't know no better. Yes, they do. So I have no remorse. I'm getting a little better. But a 13-year-old pulled the trigger. A 13 and a 17-year-old. The 13 pulled the trigger. Now, 13 went to the juvenile. But when he got out, he did do some time till he was 18. And they called me, and they said, we want to give him parole. What do you think? I said, do you feel that he feel remorse? And that was important to me. I could have just took his life. My son is gone now. So maybe I could save this kid's life that took my son. So I said, give him parole. But I never followed up with him. I don't want to see him. I don't. And this is how we feel. That pain and hurt. When you wake up in the morning, you can't get up. Nobody know what the survivors go through unless you've been through it. They say, oh, you get over it. No, you don't. You don't get over it. And this is why it's important that we have support groups. So what did I do? When I realized I couldn't bring back my two sons, I said, you know, I'm gonna start a support group. I have to make some calls so I could help save another mother, another family from feeling the pain and hurt. So in 2006, I met Reese. She had just lost her son. That's when I started my organization, so I must be met in 2007. And she had just lost her son. So we started this organization, Harlem Mothers Save. Now it's Harlem Mothers and Fathers, because there's so many fathers. And we started off with 5 mothers. And now we have 50 plus mothers and fathers. Now it's good, but it's not. And every day we are losing our kids to senseless gun violence. Thank you, Congressman, for putting this together along with our VP and along with our deputy VP. Okay, let me get it right now. But it is so important because so often we are forgotten. The survivors are forgotten because y'all think, and I'm saying y'all, a lot of people think, oh, they just crying, oh, they don't need this, that. No, we deal with the trauma. We deal with the pain and hurt every day. We help families bury their kids. Just yesterday, we had a funeral where a mother, we had to help support this mom for burying her child. We deal with all this. We give them hope, as you heard. We let them know that they're not alone. We bring in doctors. We bring in counselors. And I just want to thank some of the elected officials that supports us. Not all, and let me say that, not all, but some do. And look how you're sitting here today. It's very important that we have support. It's very important, like I told Dan a while back, we rally for the same things. But if we have solutions here today, we need to get them done. I'm gonna hold all y'all accountable that's at that table. What's happening with all these guns coming into our state and our city? That is a federal Congress task with all the help of others. Now we must stop these flow of illegal guns coming into our city and coming into our state. People say, well, how could we have some solutions? How could we stop some of this violence? You know how we could stop a lot of it? We can't stop all of it. But if people just get off their butts, the community, and stop talking about it snitching, and tell, when you see something, you say something. You have to help the police. I don't care what nobody says. I don't do nothing without the police. So let me say that. The police is right there with programs, recreation, creating programs. So it takes all of us. When he said it takes a village, we the village. You all are the village. We're the village. We could stop a lot of this violence, but you know what? People so focused. You got a lot of elected officials and community so focused on what the police did to us, but what about the black-on-black crime? I'm sick and tired of it. I lost my kids, okay? I don't want you losing yours. So these are the things that we have to do and work together. We work with other organizations. Focus on us. in these communities, not only the mass shootings, because we have to concentrate, but we killing, this is mass every day. But as soon as the police do something, let's do that with us. And I'm serious too. We have to pay attention to our little 10-year-olds that's carrying guns, go into these schools, stop playing the blame game and do something. Do something. Stop playing the blame game. And it takes everybody to help. Not just one person, not just one elected official, not just you. No, it takes all of us. We might not agree to everything, but we gotta get our city and state back together. We gotta save our children. Let's save our children. You know what to do, so we have to do it. Because I miss my 2 kids every day. Whether it's 40, 50, 60 years, I know Christmas, and my son used to fool me on Mother's Day and play the song, I always love my mother. She's my favorite girl. So when you're losing your loved one, you're looking forward to hearing that, I always love my mother. So these are the things that we deal with. You could say, oh, Jackie, I know how you feel. No, you don't, because you have not experienced it. But we need the level of support to continue to let the survivors know that they're not alone and that you're paying attention to us and that you're going to continue to help us do prevention and education, because education is the key. So I'll leave it right there. Thank you.
Thank you. So we want to thank you all for the courage of reliving what you have experienced, and now we're going to move into a conversation so we can begin to talk about solutions.
Thank you all for sharing your stories. For those of us who are involved on a daily basis with trying to stop this gun violence epidemic, it is really important for us to understand your stories, how you feel. And there are a couple of things that just came to mind as I was listening to these stories. And I think Jackie hit the nail on the head, which is mass shootings get the most attention. And they are, in some ways, the most troubling because it is just random and indiscriminate violence with an intent to kill people you don't know. But half of suicides, as Andrea was talking about, come from guns. And we have gun violence every day that are not mass shootings, that are known associates. Last night, the Manhattan DA told all of us a statistic that blew me away. 97% of gun violence victims are black and brown. In the city, in Manhattan, 97%. This is a widespread problem that needs a full rotation, a full bucket of solutions. We need red flag laws. Red flag laws are so clear-cut and obvious that it's hard to come up with a legitimate explanation to oppose them. And one of the things that I constantly bring up in terms of red flag laws, because the only thing you hear from the other side is due process, due process, due process. Well, I was a lawyer, am a lawyer. You don't need due process before you temporarily take someone's gun. You can temporarily take the gun and give that person due process. It's not an obstacle. And how many lives would it save? I use Florida as a good example of this. after the Parkland shooting, Florida, with a Republican legislature, passed red flag laws. There have been 9,000 guns that have been taken from properly, with due process, from people who are a danger to themselves or others based on that red flag laws. Governor Ron DeSantis, who's no liberal, supports the red flag laws because every sheriff in his state wants to continue to use the red flag laws, the extreme risk protection. It is common sense. And when we talk about our communities, and I want you to leave this to Antonio to talk a little bit more, because he's got some, I think, really important ideas, it's also got to be a support network, education, mental health treatment, substance abuse treatment. We have to invest in our communities. We have to use community policing, violence interrupters, people who know the communities that they're in, so that we can nip these things in the bud. No 13-year-old should be having a gun at all. And so this week, in many ways, and talking about it so much, is both inspiring and incredibly frustrating. In many respects, I wish I were my colleagues here, because New York has pretty good gun laws. New York is a leader, and it's constantly fighting the Supreme Court to try to maintain gun safety regulation. And I think Alexa's right, we would all be a lot safer without guns. But that's not realistic, so let's focus on what we can do to make gun possession safer, whether it's raising the age, universal background checks, red flag laws, safe storage laws, getting rid of high-capacity magazines. What legitimate purpose does a civilian have to use a high-capacity magazine? None. It's a weapon of war. It is for war. This is not taking people's guns away from them. This is just making sure that those who have guns are competent, qualified, and safe with them. And the overwhelming majority of Americans support this legislation. And what is incredibly frustrating for those of us in Congress pushing this forward is it's the only issue where public opinion does not seem to move politicians. But we're not giving up, and we're going to keep raising this issue. I'm proud to be on the vice chair of the Gun Violence Prevention Task Force in Congress. I joined the Dads Caucus. You know, Jackie talks about how fathers are now a part of this. I joined the Dads Caucus to advocate for basic family needs, paid family leave, child tax credit, universal child care, basic necessities that give everyone the opportunity to succeed. But I also wanted to start a gun violence prevention working group. And so I started that up because it doesn't matter if you're Democrat or Republican, you worry about your kids
That's right.
getting killed.
That's right.
And it's a message that can resonate in a slightly different way that we're going to keep pushing. And we're going to keep using it as an election year issue until we can flip the House, we can get the majority, and we can start passing these gun laws.
Very good.
So I'm incredibly grateful for all of you for being here. I will leave this room today inspired and motivated. And that is thanks to you all for doing the very difficult work of sharing your grief, your stories, your sorrow. It has an impact, and it makes a difference. So I thank you for that.
Thank you.
I'll try to keep it as short as possible. I do want to get to making it a conversation, but I do want to say that I appreciate the congressman. There's no reason why he had to get elected and not make this a level 15 priority. Sign on to the bills and keep it moving. He's been very proactive on this issue specifically, so I'm grateful to have that type of representation from Brooklyn in Congress. But locally here, when we talk about resources that are needed, I just feel that the number one driver of gun deaths or reduction in gun deaths is a good job. We've seen that in places where employment is extremely high, gun violence is down. We know that one of the hardest related to recidivism, mental health issues, the number one thing needed to keep people safe is housing, dignified and safe housing. If they don't have that, they're in the streets, and they're resorting to criminal activity, let's say, to survive. It's a survival mechanism. There's so many things we know work to prevent gun violence outside of the guns or keeping the guns away from people. I just think about Oressa's son, Juilliard, playing the flute, cooking, skateboarding. That kid was too busy. He was too busy and full of opportunity to even think about picking up a gun. He was running to get a train to go to Juilliard. That's what we want these kids to be doing. It's so much opportunity that it keeps them away from it. But we've lost opportunity. In this city, the opportunity is going down. The prices of rent are going up. Inflation is a problem. Programming is going down. When budget cuts need to happen, the first thing that goes is all the programs that have led us to this reduction, right? And I keep speaking to that. That the one thing that doesn't go down, and Ms. Rowe Adams, I know that police is important. I believe in it 100%. But when we talk about educating our young people and a cut to the Department of Education, right? A Department of Education cut, you lost them right there. We're breeding a generation of young, mostly black and brown men that are not going to get a high quality education, lose opportunity, and in doing so, can lose their life to a life of crime. So I never want the Department of Education budget cut. That's going to be the last thing in this city should ever be considered for cut. But the last thing that gets considered for cut in this city is the NYPD. And that's my issue. Yeah. Right? In the federal government, you can't cut the military budget and you can't cut the education budget. They're tied to each other.
Yes.
Because they're tied. If you want to cut the education budget, then we're going to cut military spending. And they never do it. It never gets done. Not in this city. In this city, the federal government, full of Republican, conservative people that believe the military is the most important thing in the world, they agree that Department of Education is just as important, and they're going to keep them together. And in this city, full of Democrats, progressives, that's not the case. So for me, I need Congressman Goldman to do his job at the federal level while I'm here at the borough-wide level, at the city level, to bring the resources so that when that is enacted, we also have the opportunity here. Like it's a joint work. He can't be here talking to a local school. Well, he does, but you know what I mean. In a local school, trying to do the work that with the council members do. We all have our role. And I want you guys to know, just listening to that, it just reignites, like he said, reinvigorates the work that I want to do to continue to address the gun violence. Of course, the Deputy Borough President, Kim Kauso, is the head of the work that we're doing here on gun violence and violence in general in our borough. But it's just good to hear you all, because you also, in your stories, you're so solution-oriented. Through your grieving, you're always thinking about what the next step is. What is it that we can do? Your accountability levels are really high. Now you know us all, and now you're going to hold us accountable. And I do want to say this: the people that do the best work are the ones that have no problem being held accountable. This dais should be filled with 20 people, 20 elected officials from this borough, whether state, city, federal, and it's not. And the people that are not here are not going to be held accountable. You'll never see them. You'll never ask them, hey, you didn't do this or you didn't show up. We're going to be held accountable. And I actually think that's a valuable thing, because the people that are held accountable do the best work. And I'm looking forward to that. So I just want to say thank you to all of you again for being here. Thank you.
I just want to add something, if I may, because I'm going to have to leave a little early. I want to thank our congressman, because how long you been in office?
A year.
A year. A year ago, but if you look on TV, you seen, because he done took over Washington in a good way.
Nice.
A year ago, I met Dan Richard, I met Dan going in Harlem. We did commercials, I want to say I was the first one in Harlem to endorse Dan. And that was a biggie for me. And people say, well, who is he? Who is he? They was questioning me. I say he's a good man. And you know why he's a good man? Because he keep his word. And I want y'all to hear this. He said to me, Jackie, I promise you, I will not forget you and this gun violence and what you have been through. I would not forget your story. We were standing right there near the park. I'll never forget it. He said, I'm going to deal with this issue. I'm going to deal with public safety and make sure any way I can that I could help get these guns off the street, and you have kept your word. You started working. Kudos to you. Thank you.
If I may, to follow up to that wonderful statement, Ms. Rowe Adams, you know, I wrote down a few things you mentioned in the beginning when we opened today, and I just am looking for further clarification. When you say this becomes an election issue, I'd like to know how, because I believe it always is. And I live in Harlem also, so I want to know how this can become a citywide initiative. How can we get other boroughs as invested as Brooklyn is?
It is always an election issue, but in every election, there seem to be just a couple issues that dominate the discussion. And if you even just look at the more recent elections in New York alone, we've had Roe and the Dobbs case was a huge election issue in 2022. Public safety concerns, bail reform has been a huge election issue. The polling, there are studies that evaluate all of advertising, campaign and political advertising. And there are very few paid advertisements that talk about the gun violence epidemic. And one of the reasons, and it's a chicken and the egg, right? So some people will think, oh, well, it's not a top of mind issue for the majority of voters, or it's number 5 or number 6. People care, but not as much as other things. So they don't put money into, they don't talk about it as much, they don't put money into raising it up. What I want to do is continue to put the pressure on Republicans on a federal level. And we can do that right here in New York, because there are about 6 races that are toss-ups effectively, and that the House majority is going to depend on. When we're in the minority in the House, we have zero control. We have introduced and sponsored every single rational, common sense gun safety bill, piece of legislation. We have tried to get them on the floor for a vote, but we don't have enough numbers. We have tried to put pressure on the Republicans to do that. And we have tried to elevate and lift this issue up so that it becomes a bigger issue. But New York has strong gun laws because New Yorkers want gun safety. We need to be calling our Republican members of Congress in New York. We need to be rallying. We need to be writing. We need to be making this an issue in those campaigns that are going to decide whether or not we, the Democrats who want gun safety legislation, are in the majority, or the Republicans who are defying what the public wants by refusing to do it. So part of it is all of us rallying together in particular races where it can have an impact, and part of it is just continuing to do this, to talk about it, to tell your stories, to talk about the absurdity of opposition to these very popular, very rational, very thoughtful gun safety legislation, not taking guns away, just making them safe. And it's a process, and it's going to take time, but we just have to never, never stop. And we will win this. The question is it going to be 2 years? Is it going to be 10 years? Is it going to be 20 years? And we're on the right side, as we can tell from public opinion. But we cannot stop talking about it and elevating it.
I'm curious if you think sometimes campaign funding gets in the way of tackling this critical issue, because there are, you know, complicated, not on your side, or let's just say the other side of the issue. There's a complicated relationship between campaign funding and what becomes an issue.
Look, we could have a whole nother roundtable on campaign finance of political and public, political campaigns. It is atrocious right now how much special interests can infiltrate elections, and they can dictate
Yes.
what the issues become.
Very much.
And so that is absolutely, one piece of the puzzle. We talk about, you talked about, Allison, and the borough president talked about it as well. Reentry programs
Right.
are so essential. We need to eliminate all of the barriers to reentry, to housing, to jobs that a felony conviction has brought in the past. And we need to have programs that can reintegrate people, because to your point, if you get out of prison and you can't get a loan, you can't get a job, you can't get housing, how are you supposed to make money?
Right.
And if you can't make any money to survive, then what else is there for you to do than to go back and recidivize?
Exactly, and I don't want to take up too much time. I just also want to say one more thing. Recontextualizing the Second Amendment, I think is really important, like an understanding of what guns were like when that was written versus what guns are like today is such a critical issue, and I feel like it's not something that's talked about. Like, let's talk about the ways that the people who wrote that amendment into law, the ways they were using guns. Like,
So this is incredibly relevant, because the case, the Bruin case in the Supreme Court from 2 years ago, which struck down New York law, basically said, because the conservatives said, that you have to look at 1789, when the Second Amendment was written, and see what existed and didn't exist then, and what kind of laws or regulations or rules existed. And that's the model that we have to use now in 2024. And they're doing that to strike down all sorts of regulation. But there is a way that we can flip that on its head, because there were no assault weapons then, right? So, there were so many different things that did not exist then. The Supreme Court is not intellectually honest, but if they were, we would have a real case to be made exactly based on that.
And can I just, on advocacy, it's an unfortunate thing here. The only way to beat money is through organizing. It's a very unfortunate thing. I started my career at 22 years old organizing for housing in Acorn here. I was not in New York Communities for Change. And it's sad to say, but the only way to beat money is through organizing. For a mom to follow a congressional candidate at every public forum and ask the same question, it makes a difference. It absolutely makes a difference. Because after the third time, that person that's running is going to say, X person is going to be there. I need to have a response for that. I need to be able to answer to that. And in that moment, they've engaged in a way that they probably wouldn't have engaged unless you were there. And now they're like, hey, this is what I have for you. And they could go back on their word, but they've already engaged in more than they would ever engage on that issue. So it's about showing up all the time. So it's the only way to combat money. Outside of that is campaign finance laws, which 2 years, 10 years, 20 years, we're a ways away from that in a federal government that is deeply beholden to lobbying. I don't see campaign finance laws happening very soon. The same thing with making the case that the laws, when the law was written on the Second Amendment, we're just not going to win that right now. We're ways away from winning the court, the Supreme Court, and moving justices through congressional majority. There's so much more we need to do. So for me, it's just like, Bud, we have these 6 races in New York right now that could make the difference between having a Senate and a Democratic Senate and a Democratic majority at the Congress and a Democratic president that can start enacting a lot of these laws in short order if they have a large majority. It takes work, but we can do that. So I would say, focus on the here and now. Unfortunately, our kids and our grandchildren are going to have to take on larger fights. But organizing right now, show up to those 6 campaigns. If you make it a case, it will become a case. And if you don't, it won't. And again, it's a sad reality. I don't want you to have to do that, but it's the reality that we face as people mostly that are oppressed, are ignored, are marginalized, is we got to force to be seen. So I would recommend that.
So we're down to our last 4 minutes, so I want to give you an opportunity.
Please,
Yes,
please,
ma'am.
I'm itching over here. I'm like, wait a minute. Not Another Child is the organization that I started in memory of my son. I've been doing this work for 17 years now. The balance is definitely needed on the legislative side, but as well as the investment. A lot of the investments that I'm hearing today is, once again, what everybody has been doing, and it's needed into the lives of youth, into the lives of those returning home, different things like that. The survivors need investments. Not Another Child offers a continuum of support for survivors. We will meet you at the place where your child is killed, help you to complete the crime victims compensation application, to do the funeral, the burial, the peer support sessions. I think our work speaks for itself. Jackie and I do similar work. Pam is a product of our work. She just told you today, it's no way that she could sit here. The work that we do with survivors empowers. You have a lot of traumatized, unhealed people walking around, and it makes them non-productive citizens of society. They are non-productive. At any minute, they can go on a break and be your next mass killer. And so investing into the lives of survivors is something that is greatly needed. We do monthly peer support sessions. We do a healing retreat. We just did our entire survivor list the other day because we host in Brooklyn as well as in Harlem. I can never forget Brooklyn. So we host in Brooklyn as well as in Harlem with retreats. We do pre-Mother's Day events because it's those pivotal times. We call, and while these things, see, I think these things seem so minimal to people when you say it, but it means so much to somebody that's hurting at that point. So for birthdays, anniversaries, we make calls, we do balloon releases, all types of things. But I think one thing that is important is making you all champions of the work. Prior to my son being murdered, I worked at my church doing community relations. Had an awesome relationship with Terry Coxum, who worked for Senator Schumer at the time. And even after she was gone, Garrett and everyone's still there. I stopped working there. They were still calling me because I still worked, in concert with my church. But when I had the chance, I said, what are y'all doing about gun violence? And myself and Senator Schumer took on forums just like this, inviting electeds to the table for information sessions. I heard Crystal talk about earlier the crisis management system, which is something that is a major investment around the city and around the work of being proactive to stop violence, but it also helps with the reactive. So myself and Jackie are part of that and receive investments from that. But we do need you guys as champions, that you're able to talk about the work from all spectrums of it. Not just what we can do to stop the bullet coming out of the chamber, but what we can do to support those on the other side of the gun. With federal funding, we got approved and pushed through for an earmark, what is it, CPS, I believe it is, for $1.5 million. I talked to Senator Schumer for us to build a survivor site. We have cure violence sites, at least 37 of them across this city, but none of them are for survivors. As much as survivors are welcome there, they're not for survivors. So as Crystal was talking, somebody was talking about violence interrupters earlier. Trauma interrupters. That is what survivors offer. We can interrupt trauma because we know when you're getting ready to go there. And so we have built up a whole continuum of support that we just need investments in. That's all we need, you know, and just to have you guys, I know we're talking about preventing gun violence, but we also have to keep fostering healing at the table. Because one of the biggest ways to prevent gun violence is to foster healing, is to heal communities that think that they have been left out to die, to heal communities of people where they feel like no one cares. And so, the last thing I'll say is I believe our resilience makes others lack accountability. Because we are resilient, because you'll see us at these tables and you know we're not going to stop, we're going to keep doing what we're doing, others feel less accountable because they know we're going to make it happen. They know that if I wanted to be working a full-time job, I would still get off and do what I need to do in my son's name. But that's not fair. The greatest work can be done when it's done at 100%. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
To piggyback off of Arissa on organizations, Moms Demand Action, when I became a member with them, I learned a whole lot about legislators, going out to speaking engagements, students, us walking over the bridge, shutting it down, you know, walking that walk. And the same thing I say as organizations that need survivors. We all, as survivors, like I work for the 67 Clergy Council God Squad as an outreach worker, as a survivor. And they have programs for the kids. The FLA program for the children. They have the Leadership Academy. They have Next Gen, like the kids that are incarcerated that can come out. Then we also have our support group as well, as in the mothers that, and we do a whole lot. It's a whole lot that the survivors do. And then you also have survivors that have their own organization that's doing that work and don't have the, you know, the funding to do more things for their community when they can, but they're coming out of their pockets to do these things. So we need more funding for the survivors to help walk these streets as we do our voice out stories and everything. I mean, I'm all over Brooklyn. I can go to Staten Island, I live in Manhattan now, but I live in Manhattan for what? I live in Manhattan because my son was killed and I had to get transferred. But the housing, I mean, like I met a lot of people. I met Harvey Epstein. Dan, you know, we already know, because we wouldn't be sitting at this table. We have a lot of solutions, and we just want them solutions to be heard. And I just thank you, Dan, for sitting in that seat and keep on sitting in that seat, and all the council persons and council members. I hope that we all be able to work with you and do more roundtables and come up with that big solution.
Again, we want to thank everybody for coming out and sharing. We know this was not an easy thing to do. This is just the beginning of the conversation. You know about what the Congressman is doing down in D.C. and in New York, and we also have heard about what the BP's focus is. So thank you so much. We really have to wrap it up, but we appreciate you being here today.
Thank you.